Hey, this is our first live. I'm just waiting for Margot to join me, and it's pretty exciting. We're going to be free from OCD, plus the parent group Ottawa OCD or OCD Ottawa. So, you know, we've got some of the subjects that have been asked for from our followers in the comments, and we're just going to give this a trial run, really. So, waiting for Margot to get on, but we're going to be talking about morality OCD, rumination, checking, avoidance, and accepting uncertainty. So, Margot should be joining very soon, and we'll get off to the races with introductions. Oh, here we are. Hey, Margot.
Hello.
You're live now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Maybe we should start with intros, because some people, or maybe a lot of people, most people will have just known the account and maybe saw your intro picture saying, "Hi, I'm Margot." Have you done an introduction?
I just wrote a little bio.
Now, this is very exciting because a lot of people are reading your posts and saving them. I mean, I reread your posts because I have reading compulsions.
Almost all of us do.
Yeah. Well, how about I'll get this rolling. I was a big part of the support group in Ottawa, and when I was rebuilding the group, you came, and I remember I did your first interview or the first talk with you on screen, and I remember telling you, like, you know a lot about this. Why don't you volunteer with us? And you were like, no. And then slowly you built your way up to being huge in outreach. I mean, it's so big that we'll talk about this soon, but like this is now globally, this is now made for an international audience. So do you want to chat about kind of like, I don't know, give your little background?
Okay, yeah, so let's see. In summer of 2019, I went to the Ottawa Institute for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and I started treatment there, and I was there for about a year doing therapy. Like, in the end, I was only doing it like once a month, but I started going like once every week. And yeah, I just learned a lot about exposure and response prevention, like ACT and the various, I did a lot of reading. I think I read that year like 15 OCD books.
Well, you read so much, you told everyone, you were like, guys, reading about OCD can be a compulsion. Like nobody's read that much about OCD. That's why I think you can write so much on it.
It didn't feel like a compulsion though, because my compulsions feel like I don't want to do them, and it feels like against my values. This I was just doing for pleasure, so.
Well, I've read a lot about OCD as well, but I'm pretty sure you've read more, which is a lot. Because it got to the point where you were recommending me books. So anyone listening, you know, Brain Lock's a big one. Grayson's is a big one. But like some people can just follow the Instagram and get a lot of the big ideas. Because I remember saying, hey, you should make memes. And you were like, no. And then now look at you.
When I sat down, I made like 40 memes in an hour.
They really lend itself to like the brain lock that we have. I think Jake did a great job making the new Free From OCD logo, like with no input from me, because the original thing is like the sword killing the bug or the demon, but the unlocked brain makes a lot of sense if we're just stuck in a rut of checking, or am I a this, or is this intrusive thought really like reflect who I am? Anyway, veering off subject a little, is there anything else you want people to know, like for your backstory? I think a lot of people just wake up and they're like, hey, I mean, I've got this, I'm stuck in my head, you know, because you're just like almost everyone else, I think. You just kind of, how'd you figure out you had OCD? Did you always know?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So 10 years ago, I took a psychology class, and we had to learn about like all the disorders, and then OCD was just on my page, and they were like, person who checks a lot, person who obsesses, and I like checked almost every single one, and I was like, oh.
You've told me, sorry to say, I don't know, maybe this is revealing too much, but like, you know, checking to the point where you're taking pictures and then you can leave the house, and like
That's really common, and I freaking have not gotten past checking. You know, checking is, I'm still, mind you, I'm, you know, living somewhat of an adventurous life, but checking is a tough one to get rid of.
To this day, I still like feel the need to check things. I just don't.
And it's weird because unless you have OCD, you have no idea. You could just spend the day in the kitchen being like, is it off?
I still do the
Okay.
thing sometimes where I stare at stuff though, and I'm like, is it off though?
Yeah, it's annoying because I think of all the other things we could have been doing. Is there anything else we should say maybe before we get to our bio about you? I mean, you've had a significant amount of treatment and such. Like you went to the last OCD virtual event, I think, even too.
The conference, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, the conference was amazing.
Cool. Well, because I imagine most people who follow this account haven't been to like an OCD I haven't been to I've been to OCD events, but I haven't been to like a full-on conference.
So we should specify what it is. It's the IOCDF. Every early August, they have a conference. And they have speakers like when I talk about books that I read, the author will speak. And I was kind of fangirling there.
Well, through your Zoom account, I'm sure. Well, maybe we should, I don't know if we should probably talk about how now we live in a contamination OCD person's like dream. You know, back when my contamination OCD was like really bad, you know, I was taking hand sanitizer with me before we were like told to, you know. So it's an interesting turnaround. Okay, so you found out you had OCD in a psychology class. Did you then just go to a therapist, or what happened?
No, it was actually really hard to find a therapist. As like many of you know, finding somebody who specializes in OCD is hard. And there's a lot of shame around it. So I couldn't even admit to anybody that I had OCD.
Shame's a big thing. Like, yeah, I still battle it. Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. But yeah, shame is a huge part of OCD. And so for the first few years, I just kind of like managed my compulsions because they're not that bad. But the more compulsions you do, the more it takes over your life. So then it got to a point in university where I called and the mental health services just never called me back. I went to a doctor. He told me that OCD is not a big deal and you can just live with it.
What the hell?
Finally,
like that's the worst advice I've ever heard.
It was wild. He was like, I know a school teacher has OCD, like it's fine. I was like, okay.
Wow.
So then I got my doctor. He's a young guy, and he said, yeah, are you okay? And I almost cried. And he was like, please do CBT. And I was like, okay. So then I Googled CBT Ottawa, and then this clinic popped up, and then I read the bios of the people, and almost all of them specialized in OCD. So then I just like signed up for them.
How did you find the support group?
I was Googling Grayson's book, which, by the way, I put on the Instagram page if you're curious. And as I was Googling it, like you guys reference it in your website. So your website came up.
Cool. Yeah, the website was pre-me. There's like 3 phases of the group where it was the guys before me who kind of like died off like the dinosaurs. And then I kind of built. Then there was a transition period, I guess maybe 2 phases, and then it's maybe with me, and now it's with you guys without me. So maybe that's the 3 phases. Anything else for a background on you, and then I'll go?
No, that's it.
All right, cool. So I was annoying someone at my work. She was like, she went and she didn't even tell me I had OCD. So I had a compulsion where I was having panic attacks. And I thought it was a glucose thing, so I had to eat frequently. And so I was always, and then contamination concerns, so I'd bring like almonds around in like a container. And then I would always open the container and close it the exact same way. And the sound infuriated her. So she went and told my family who worked at the office. And she was like, go to seminars on OCD, your son has it. And then I found out I had OCD because my family went to an OCD seminar without me to learn about it. And then one of them was like trying to get me to read the seminar notes. saying it would be interesting. It was very weird, an indirect way to find out. And then actually what happened was, as I was reading the notes being like, all right, fine, you say it's important. And then what convinced me to go see someone was that it's in one of the slides it said that one of the hallmarks of OCD is suicidal ideation. And that was just something that it was an intrusive thought that really bothered me. And I was like, oh, good Lord. You know, I guess I have it then. We've got our first comment. Yeah, being misunderstood is really frustrating. 19 years is a long time to find appropriate help. And it's pretty common now that we've seen enough people.
Yeah, 20 years too.
Yeah, you know, and a lot of people don't. Well, more people understand it now because we kind of live in the age of wash your hands, etc. But it's so all-encompassing, like when it comes to checking, and then just the pervasive fear of your intrusive thoughts and how they just keep shifting. It's way more metaphysical than I thought. But anyway, that's how I found out. I went to one of the first in-person conferences in Ottawa, and then I just called up the lady running it, and that's how I got about a year or maybe 2 years of the best, like, therapy with the best in Ottawa, to the point where she's running, you know, she runs.
Clinic, right?
Yeah, with the lady who runs the intensive OCD program. Like, you can't even get such a
lucky that this clinic is in Ottawa.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's other people, but like, it's hard to, if you're not in the city, I imagine it's like close to impossible. I mean, we're doing this now to somewhat as outreach, but you have to really, you have to figure out how, like, this is your thing, you know. I didn't know, and it turns out I had kind of had this my whole life.
A lot of psychologists don't even know what OCD is really, or how to treat it. And
then it's like, it can be so complicated that people just tune out. They're like, all right, well, it's your thing. I just, you know. Anyway, and then
they start to ramble, and then they're like, what?
Yeah, so they're like, I'm not supposed to tell you anything. You just say maybe. They're like, just say maybe every time. Okay, well, and then just to finish off kind of my background, I then found the support group online. I think I Googled it, and I started going, and I felt so relieved that other people had this, because I thought it was super isolating. It was super, you know, the walls kind of closing in. It was extremely difficult. Emotionally, it's like, you know, traumatizing, but you live in your own little world, and you've got your own little quirks. And I felt so refreshed that other people could understand or went through the same battles. And it's to the point when the group started falling apart, I was motivated to bring it back, which kind of brings us to, you know, how it split. You know, at first, this account was OCD Ottawa, and it became pretty apparent that we had 5 people from OCD Ottawa following, and 900 or 800 people around the world who were following as well. And people were asking us from like India and Nepal if they could join our, you know, Canadian support group. Yeah. So that's why we're free from OCD now. And then we've got Ottawa OCD as well, one for the local group. And then I'm also not in Ottawa anymore. I took the kind of bold move of moving to Spain in the pandemic. So I'm somewhat international. I'm no longer local Canadian now. But that's the branding change. Do you have anything to add to that? Because you're a big part of, like, before you, we didn't really use the Instagram. We didn't have an international audience before.
Yeah, I think the branding change is just so that we have more liberties to kind of do what we want. OCD Ottawa, like, we have a lot of volunteers, and, you know, it's a support group. This can be like more than a support group, and I think that's what we're aiming for in the long term. Yeah.
Well, you can serve both audiences, like people out of the local area and then everyone else, because there's significant pools on both sides. Okay, so why don't we talk about, actually speaking about like what people want to talk about, panic attacks and anxiety attacks came up on the account this week. I kind of think they're similar. I've had a few recently because my job has changed a lot, and I finally got, you know, the legal ability to stay in Spain like 2 days ago. So and then I now work in 3 other towns. I'm teaching in Spain, and one of my classes has a COVID case, so they're locked down, but I'm still teaching, and it's been my anxiety has been to the point where I'm getting attacks like around town, and I think you kind of just. I think it comes from flooding, you know, like I'm having this level of exposure because I have this level of uncertainty when it comes to contamination, being able to afford things, like where do I work? How do I work? I don't have a card.
Though, for people?
What's that?
Like, what is flooding?
Oh, yeah. So maybe we should go back to like exposure response prevention. So if you have OCD, you've got like an urge to get certainty depending on what your thing is at the moment. But if you want to make sure your house doesn't burn down and you just use the stove, you're going to be checking the stove, and you're stuck in a gear of like, is it off? Maybe if I stare at it longer, or maybe if I look up and down and over and left. And so the idea is to expose yourself to an uncertainty, you know, turn the oven on, turn it off, and leave the room, not knowing. And then like when the compulsion comes, like you have to go check it, you don't. It's kind of self-torment for the long-term health and for your short-term pain. Like, you know, it's working when it hurts. Like, how's that for an explanation? What do you think?
Well, flooding to me would be if you had never done an exposure before, and then you do that one, you turn the oven on, you turn it off, and then you leave the house, and then you're like real far away from friends. And
so
then,
that's ERP.
Yeah, that's, to me, that's something, because that's where like you're literally putting yourself at a 10 like right away. Oh yeah, because in exposure you have a hierarchy. Like 1 is something that doesn't cause much anxiety, 10 is like the most anxious thing you can possibly do.
Yeah, and so flooding, you're right, I didn't finish the thought. So that's ERP plus getting to a point where you can't handle it anymore. And then flooding is where emotionally you kind of feel kind of like you're going off a waterfall, and you just feel the terror. And to me, you get the panic attacks, or I have at least, when you're at flooding for so long, and then your body is just like, we're done. And then so you can get for me, it's dry mouth, to the point where if I think I'm gonna have a panic attack, I bring my water bottle with water around, just so that if I get the dry tongue, I don't get a panic attack over like I'm like gonna die because I'm too thirsty or something. Like, it gets to that point. My worst one, I had like a beating heart, and then like you can kind of get dizzy and stuff like that. So it's that's how I would say flooding. That's kind of like exposure, anxiety, flooding, panic attacks. I think it's kind of like a stare. And then the thing is that the panic attack can come out of nowhere and just be, you know, like take you
It'd be like
unaware
from a thought, right? So like it doesn't have to be an external trigger. You just have a thought that like freaks you out, and then you start ruminating.
Yeah.
To me, it's like when you start ruminating and you're like, what if this happened? And then what if this? And then what if this? And then it like escalates. And
now that you mention it, yeah.
I'm like, cool. So I'm not doing anything else for the next 2 hours.
You made a great post about how when you're tired, you know, you can get attacked, or not attacked, maybe attacked. Well, you'll get stuck in a rut where you're repeating things. Like for me, one of my checking things is I will want to check I did everything in my morning routine, and every day I'm up at like. Oh, that's really funny. Someone's here in a Spanish support group. I'm in Spain. I can barely understand what they're saying right now. I don't know. I can't read and do this.
Oh, TikTok. Yeah, I love that page.
Oh, yeah? Maybe I should follow that.
They make like me just as good as me, but in Spanish.
Oh, wicked. We should reach out. I'll try and do it in Spanish. That was a part of you know, being in Spain. I had to realize it's like, I'm used to understanding everything in English, and now I have to get used to like understanding a quarter to a half of what's happening. And my need for certainty is just taking a smack where, you know, like, you know, I'm in rural Andalusia. So, you know, some people, Spanish people don't understand what they're saying. You know, I'd be fluent in Madrid, you know, but here I'm in the woods of Andalusia.
like to bring it back to OCD, like it's funny how people with OCD struggle with uncertainty in certain areas, but then can do stuff like travel to Spain. Like I traveled, I had OCD and I went to like, you know, Mexico and South America because those uncertainties didn't bother me as much.
I will say that I'm definitely struggling with OCD, but I think the only reason I could do it now is all of the all my knowledge about it and all my kind of exposures on it. But it's certainly, you're right though, it's really weird. You know, like I could skateboard through traffic back when I lived somewhere where it made sense to skateboard, and like the uncertainty of getting hit by a car would take most people without OCD would be like, well, that's crazy risks, you know?
Because Howie Mandel, like, he's on TV and stuff, but he can't shake people's hands, right? So like OCD is very specific.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't miss shaking hands. Someone shook my hand. I've had 2 handshakes since COVID, and I'm like, whoa, like, you know, like, what, are we trying to die? You know, like, this is funny. Okay, the next comment that came up this week was about morality OCD, and the two of us agree that we think it powers all of OCD when you get right down to it. Because I think when the intrusive thought comes in, whether it's the bucket of, you know, violence or sexuality or, you know, calamity is coming, it's all morality. Like, did you do the right thing? Or are you a terrible person because, and like, you know, from what I read, everyone gets, you know, these thoughts. We just are super sensitive to them, or they're just a lot stronger in our minds. What do you think?
I think everybody has the exact same thoughts as us, but we do a lot of analyzing. So somebody will think like, oh, did I check the stove? And then they'll think, I'm not sure. And then they continue on with their day. Whereas I'll think about it, go, oh my God, I burned down the house. It will be all my fault. Everybody will hate me and I'll have nowhere to live. So
you know,
there's
it's funny.
different thought processes going on here.
Yeah, and then like, it does kind of hit harder to home because if you do, you know, a lot of treatment is thinking, well, why does it matter? So you can get to the uncertainty and accept it. And like, is the stove off? It is kind of hard to get down to, well, if the house burned down because of me, I'm a bad person.
Exactly.
And then you've got to, this is where I think you shine in talking about acceptance a lot, because you have to accept you don't know and you can't spend all day checking. And you know what I mean? Like, you don't know who, like, you can't spend all day checking. You might be a bad person, and that's the treatment. You just moved on. You move on. Am I wrong?
Acceptance is the basis of like treatment. Yeah, it's the core of treatment. It's accepting yourself. It's accepting whatever happens, whatever outcome. And that does not mean agreeing with it. And people keep confusing this. Okay? So I don't agree with the fact that the house might burn down, but I have to accept it because or else I will spend my whole day like checking the stove. And I'll get nothing.
It's annoying because like well, you know, you have to leave. Like, you know what's shocking is a lot of people don't leave the house, and then like they are really kept in a box because of OCD. But it is definitely possible to, you know, follow your dreams with it. I never thought I'm not going to go to Spain because I have OCD, just because I've done a lot of stuff with it. But I know people who, for months in COVID, you know, had a lot of trouble leaving the house because they'd have to touch a doorknob or something like that. So I think there's a lot to lose if you don't take this on.
I think that OCD, when it gets to its worst, you can't leave your room, right? Because the risk of harm just feels so great. So it makes your room smaller and smaller and smaller, like the more you do compulsions.
Yeah. Why don't we switch to rumination? I know you've been ruminating about rumination.
Yeah, so OCD Stories podcast recently published a episode called Rumination is a Compulsion. And this is something that I've been thinking about, ruminating about for like a few months now. And I know because I wrote a post like ages ago and it said, what is the difference between obsessions and compulsions? And I wrote it just as I was thinking about it. I didn't think much of it. And then I heard this podcast and I was like, yes, this is what it is. So like, there aren't really obsessions. It's mostly compulsions. The obsession is just a thought, but everybody has the thought, okay? The compulsion is the ruminating. So like
Oh, so like it's the circle that keeps going.
yeah, but it is a cyclical disorder, but then when you think about it, it's really just you in your head being like, why am I a bad person or why am I a good person? Like
Well,
I'm
I
trying
had
to
a contamination one last night where I was like trying to think of why I couldn't fall asleep, and then I was trying to think of like what happened, and I was trying to figure out, why I could not fall asleep and what the symptom might be from, and trying to get causation. And in the end, I had to go, I don't know, you
well,
know.
that's what treatment is, okay? So like you have this thought, like, okay, am I homosexual? So then you go, okay, like let me think about like, was I attracted to that woman down the street? Was I like in that magazine or whatever? And you're going through it in your mind. So you're not actually thinking I'm gay. You're thinking, am I? And that's the difference. It's not like you keep mulling it over in your head. Whereas if you just stopped and said, I don't know, it
Well,
feels like admitting something, but you're actually just admitting that you don't know. And
the
you
way you
stop.
explained it made me think, you're almost like hired as by OCD as a lawyer, and you're compiling evidence for a case, and
Yeah, you're
then
like a detective or something.
it's true. You're either a detective or a lawyer, and you're getting evidence to make an argument, and then in the end, to get out of the whole thing, you have to just say I don't know and drop it. Because I mean, let's face it, there are benefits to really having an active mind and being able to read every book on OCD within like 3 months. But then, there's a double-edged sword. So rumination's a big one, because when you can catch yourself doing it, you can save an enormous amount of time and energy. And usually if you're ruminating, like you're amping your anxiety up.
Yes.
And then like that's all like a long-term go like this. But obviously if you drop ruminating, you'll have an anxiety spike. But then you can go and do, like you talk about, I think this is from Brain Log. If you realize you're in the middle of a compulsion, you could just go do something else.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's absolutely brain lock is devalue your obsession by refocusing your attention on something else. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And I'm such a proponent of like, move on with your day. Like, okay, you're gonna obsess, like you can't control that. So like just move on. And then as your brain focuses on something else, it can only focus on one thing at a time. That's why we can only obsess on one thing at a time. So
I've been obsessing on like stuff that really I should have dropped, and then actual things happen, and I'm like, oh, I better stop trying to figure out if I did this morning, and then go actually do the thing that matters. I I do think we end up better with the uncertain times we have now than otherwise, because we've had uncertainty to this level before all of the disturbance in everyone's lives is there. So I mentioned to you personally, like a lot of the teachers I work with, I have less contamination OCD than they do, because I've lived with it for 2-3 decades more than they have. And so they're more concerned about masks and hand sanitizer and hugging children. It gets really sad if you work in primary school, like hugging children is now bad. And but because of all this experience with uncertainty, contamination, etc., it's not all bad. Like, in fact, it can help. Rumination, though, generally by the time you figure it out, you're ruminating, you've probably done it too long. Would you agree?
I agree, and I think that this is a practice. I call it like learning a language. So you don't know how to do it at first. Well, you're kind of muddling along, but it's all about observing at first. So you're gonna probably ruminate for a day and then be like, oh. But then the next time you catch yourself, it'll be a bit shorter and a bit shorter. So now I wake up and I think, okay, my brain's about to ruminate. And then it starts to do that thing. And then I'm like, okay, we're going to meditate now. And then I meditate on Headspace for 15 minutes. And then I wake up. I mean, that's a good day. Some days I do lay there and ruminate for 30 minutes. But I know what I'm doing.
I think that's what's nice about some of your posts is you're like, a successful day can sometimes be getting out of bed.
Yep.
Like success for people with OCD that are really exposing themselves is different than someone without OCD that has like a life without those challenges. And it can be a really big deal to maintain your regular routine with a hard day of compulsions. And that's been a couple of days for me. So why don't we move on to checking? We've talked about checking, but this I think everyone does to some respect. I mean, I think part of rumination is checking. Like depends what you're ruminating about. More obvious things are like if you have everything before you leave somewhere, if you've done everything. You told me that like you're pretty ninja sometimes. Like so when you were attacking checking, sometimes you would just leave things places like because
Sometimes
you're like I'm not checking.
I would like run away. It's a compulsion, but I'd be like, no. And then I would like run out the door.
Checking is one of those ones where people who don't have OCD will probably notice there's like a quirk about you because like I'll just stand up and like look at my chair, you know, and I think people are probably catching on to this. But it's like at this point, I mean, we talked about shame earlier, like I don't tell everyone like, hey, I've got OCD, but like it's not as big a deal as before. Now that everyone to a degree has some part of OCD, but it's checking is one of those ones where if you think we're good at hiding it, but like if checking takes over.
Everybody with OCD is kind of good at hiding it because we talked about this in support. We don't want people to know how, okay, we think we're kind of crazy. I don't like the word crazy, but like I thought it for a long time. So, and people have that perception. If you're like checking something 10 times and like touching it to like touch stuff to make sure it was like in place, people will look at you. I remember this girl in high school. I kept like re-putting my lunchbox in my locker and I didn't know why I was doing it. And this girl's looking at me like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh my God. And so then I stopped doing that as long as somebody was like watching me.
We have more control than we think because we can do that based out of like wanting to hide it. We are good at hiding it. I mean, I've had people I've met through support that like have really elaborate checking after parking their cars. That's like,
oh my gosh, I have that too. Like I use response prevention, but it's a huge one.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't driven in a very long time. However, I do live in Spain, and I'm not like allowed to. But it's driving's a big one. That's one, you know, when you're kind of waking up to everything that OCD is. Usually, there's something about driving because it's the uncertainty in driving and the morality of like if you're a good driver, or if you might hurt someone, or if you leave something behind, or if you didn't park it right and it goes down, or
Have to do with like you go over a speed bump and then you're like, did I hit somebody? So you go back and check.
We have a mutual friend that used to like stop and like move things out of the way on the road, stuff like that. And I'm not against
a sense of responsibility for other people.
Yeah, exactly. Like we feel more responsibility than we should. I think it ties into shame and stuff. You know, and that is great, but it can be used against us as well. I mean, you know, personally, if we are overdoing it, we don't put ourselves first enough, and that hurts us. And then also other people that don't have good intentions can use it against us. As a shameless plug, we also run Weaponized Empath if people are interested in relationship abuse, etc. But why don't we move on to avoidance? Because this is huge. I've been avoiding things. I think everyone avoids things. What's your take on avoidance? Because it's a compulsion, would you say?
Oh my gosh. Avoidance is probably the most insidious compulsion that exists. Actually, my last session with my therapist, she said, watch your avoidance. Like that was one of her final remarks. I think it's because when you're feeling good, or even when you're not, but like we tend to just like avoid things. We're like, oh, I could just not do that and then I won't upset. But the problem is the more you do that, the less things you're able to do, right? And it's actually showing your brain that that thing is dangerous because you're avoiding it. So every time anyways, avoidance is just like throughout the themes, probably one of the most awful things you can do for making your disorder worse, even though you feel better in the moment.
Well, you know, I'm living somewhat adventurously, but I have had to, or maybe I've just been out of bad habits, avoiding things, and you end up setting up little disasters for yourself by doing it. It's worse for the disorder, it's worse for you, and it's hard to spot. So
that's why my therapist made me look out for it, because you don't always see that you're avoiding. like for example, I developed a contamination issue with masks. So I'd only put it in like this one pocket and I wouldn't touch it. And then one day I washed it and I looked at it and I was like, did I wash this? And I started questioning it. And then I realized I had been engaging in avoidance behavior. So my brain was saying this mask was dangerous. And I had about like 3 or 4 days of like obsessing about it.
That's interesting. I remember you were telling me about some of your, like, because you do intense treatment on it. Like, I remember you were like, I don't know if you were exactly contaminating masks, but it was pretty intense. I
Oh yeah,
thought,
so
I
I
think,
took the mask and I like rubbed it on like banisters. So like as soon as this happens to me now, I do the opposite of avoidance. I just like contaminate as like much as I can, like while being, safe with health precautions. But like, yeah, I'm at the point with exposure response that like I know what's gonna happen if I don't take this head on.
yeah, you should know, like, if you avoid things, they don't get better. Like, and they can be as big as relationships, finance, health. It's everything, like, to the point where you mentioned people don't leave a room and like stuff like that, or they can only be in a certain room. I remember someone was talking about like certain rooms in their apartment were contaminated, they just didn't go in there. So that's like avoiding rooms in your house. And to the point where like you're then paying a rent for an apartment and living at your partner's house because your apartment's contaminated, so you're just throwing money away. Whereas if you're paying $1,500 for rent and utilities and internet at a place you don't live, treatment is not that expensive in comparison. Anyway, that's avoidance. Why don't we wrap on accepting uncertainty, which is the easiest sounding thing and hardest to do, and kind of like the key to getting better or going to the next level. I think you end up every time you get a little better, it's because you're accepting more, you're able to accept more uncertainty.
Exactly. I think like another key, there's self-acceptance, which is like the foundation, and then accepting uncertainty. And those are like the two pillars of recovery. And they're way easier said than done though. But yeah, like, because our brain catastrophizes. So when we accept uncertainty, it's not like a normal person who will be like, oh, like it's probably fine, the house isn't going to burn down. I just keep using this example. Whereas we have to accept, like, our brain is telling us that 99% sure the house is going to burn down, and we have to accept that. So it's hard.
I think there's these specific things, like, if you're talking about checking the stove, or, whether you're a bad person because of either you feel violent urges, or you feel shameful urges, or, whether it's sexuality, etc. Thinking of all the big umbrellas to hit, those are like specific theme-based ones. And then I think for the self-acceptance, you have to go, like, oh, I have kind of a tendency to freak out about uncertainty. I've got like an excitable brain, and that's okay. It's like cross to carry, and I think we have higher bar for ourselves than normal, and that includes just
we set a bar for ourselves that nobody could ever humanly attain.
And then we kind of lash ourselves for not keeping like that.
We're so toxic to ourselves.
And I think that might be why, toxic people are attracted, because they're like, oh, look at this person, he's already lashing himself. She's already lashing herself. Wouldn't it be easy to just slide in there and then just make her think it's her fault, make him think it's his fault? And I think acceptance, it sounds kind of cheesy, but it really is the big key. Because if you get through that door with, you have your kind of great attributes, and you've got, your squeaky wheels, and if you take care of yourself, like, we can do lots of great things, but, we've got kind of like little quirks we got to work on. And accepting ourselves is kind of a part of accepting uncertainty, because we're always worried about uncertainty. I don't know, have you gotten past it?
Well, for me, it's like, this happened to me late in treatment. It took me about a year, but I realized that I had to accept that I had OCD in order to recover. which is really, everything in OCD is like the opposite of what you think. I also then had to accept that I could not have OCD because it made me doubt that too. And so,
Interesting.
yeah, accepting those two, like accepting the uncertainty that I might not have OCD, because saying I have OCD is a reassurance, saying like, well, it's okay that I don't have this compulsion because I have OCD, so I'm still a good person. But that quickly devolves into, what if I don't have OCD? And that's what happened to me.
It happens a lot, and then it started even happening with me where I, like, you know, out of like a self-esteem thing, it's like, well, maybe I don't have it, or maybe I have it, and then I'm like, I like made all of these organizations for OCD. How do I have this? It's like everyone kind of has the do I have it or do I not have it, and it's a part of just the uncertainty thing. It's annoying, but our cross to bear is uncertainty. So it's even about the, I mean, I don't know, do you call it a disorder? I guess it's a disorder. I don't like the words disorder and disease, but that's what they call it.
Humans put labels on stuff in order to make sense of the world, and so that we can treat it, so we can put a name on it. But then beyond that, I don't really like call it a name. I don't know. I have a lot.
I like the metaphor of kind of like a really expensive race car where it is high maintenance, but it goes really fast. And you know, like, you know, you can't really drive, you know, it's not smart to drive it in like bad conditions and stuff like that, but it's a high performance vehicle. And then it doesn't make sense to treat it like you know, like a car that is built to go into mud and stuff like that. I don't know, like I guess it has to work for you, but it's funny, like we've got a high level of treatment, a high level understanding of it, and we still have to kind of accept we don't know really.
Yeah, I think that recovery, like, I thought it was some magical thing, but I think it's just like you're okay with not feeling safe all the time, and you're okay with that and not knowing, and that takes practice. It's just like a habit, and it's not like one day you wake up and you're recovered. It's when you're just like, there's ups and downs, right? Recovery is a roller coaster, and some days I feel like I'm back to square one, but I bounce back a whole lot quicker.
Yeah, it's cool to hear you say that, because I had a rocky week, and like it does go up and down, and then you end up doing things that are pretty wild. I remember you paid me the compliment. You're like, I can't believe you have OCD and you'd go to Spain in the pandemic, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to not go. It's like I had gotten to a level where, you know, I would accept I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm so used to accepting I might get sick because of something random that I'm ready for it. Whereas other teachers without 20 to 30 years of that level of exposure to like health contamination, not a big deal. And we tease each other for getting worried about different themes. It always changes.
Yeah, I call it like a game of whack-a-mole. You get over one theme and then another one pops in. Because it's like our brain always feels like it needs to latch onto something to feel safe. It can't just like go and be like, maybe I'm not. Who knows?
Okay, well, we exceeded our time cap. You were right. We went a little longer than maybe we were hoping. This was our first live, so do you have any famous last words? Go ahead.
Oh, what I think, like, going forward personally is like each of these topics and more could be their own live, because there's a lot of, like, you can take one topic and then give examples from several themes, so that might be an option.
Sure, and I like the idea of if when people comment, they do they'll comment specifically, and they might be more. It might help us be able to, like, okay, well, people are asking about this or that, but I'm happy to do that as well. Do kind of like a theme breakdown.
Yeah, that's just an idea, but yeah, I think, like, famous last words, I'm excited to start this live stream thing, and I think that it's an interactive process, and we want your comments, and we will make the live streams for you. So, like, sending me a DM would be great. Just like, I really want this topic. Me and Charlie will tell you what we think about this topic.
Yeah, it sounds fun. Definitely a big success for our first one. So thanks for watching, and thanks, Margot. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.